When it comes to rivalry, few stories have roots as deep as the conflict between Arabs and Israelis. Imagine a clash that didn't start yesterday or even in the last decade, but millennia ago, involving matters of faith, ancient prophecies, and territorial disputes. Is this historical rivalry merely a political issue? Or do the ancient scriptures carry a message that foresaw all of this? What many do not know is that, amid this apparent chaos, there is a plan laid out, a prophecy that may explain why the Middle East lives in constant tension. And the question remains, how do these ancient words still shape the present and future? Today, we will delve into these mysteries and uncover what the Bible truly reveals about this dispute. Buckle up, because what follows may change how you see the stories and conflicts you thought you already understood. The prophecy that the descendants of Ishmael would live amid conflicts and rivalries still echoes through the deserts and cities of the Middle East. It's as if the shadow of those words has seeped into the conflicts the region faces to this day. Imagine a story that begins thousands of years ago and still influences today's headlines. This omen about the descendants of Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn, born of Hagar, foreshadowed a destiny marked by a life in hostility toward all his brothers. This announcement is not merely a prophecy. It is a powerful lens that reveals the complexity of conflicts in the heart of the Middle East, where ancient ties of blood and territory meet on a fine line between peace and dispute. This prophecy doesn't limit itself to a spiritual context. It translates into historical, ancient, and lasting rivalries between neighboring biblical nations. Observing the disputes between Arabs and Israelis, it's inevitable to wonder, are we witnessing the continuation of that same ancestral conflict? It's as if the very soil of the Middle East carries this heritage of tension, rooted in biblical prophecies. The idea of hostility doesn't just speak of declared wars, but also of the small gestures of rivalry that permeate the everyday lives of these communities. Think of neighborhood relations. When there's an ancient resentment, even the most casual encounters can become small battles. This atmosphere of conflict is not just symbolic, it's visceral. There's an almost mystical element to how this rivalry persists, fueled by factors beyond what is visible. This prophecy not only survives but seems to renew itself with each generation, bringing political and spiritual implications. The conflict between the descendants of Ishmael and other biblical nations, especially Israel, appears to be an unending cycle. Look at the religious and territorial divisions. They act as mirrors reflecting an ancient history of disputes and fragile alliances. However, some say that all of this has a greater purpose, like a kind of teaching about the consequences of rivalries and prophecies that come true. This purpose can be interpreted in many ways, and perhaps that is the most fascinating mystery. For those seeking to understand the reason for this enmity, the Bible offers a powerful starting point. Yet the story goes beyond. It's not just an ancient rivalry. It involves a deep understanding of the origins of nations, the concept of prophetic inheritance, and how that legacy still shapes perceptions of identity and belonging. Ishmael's prophecy remains a reminder that certain words have the power to shape generations, transcend time, and influence destinies. Now, as we dig deeper into this enigma, what will the next chapter of this story reveal about the impact of these divisions on the region's politics and religion? The conflict between the descendants of Ishmael and other biblical nations is a story that spans generations, like an ancient cycle that stubbornly repeats itself. The biblical prophecy tells us that Ishmael would live in hostility toward all his brothers, and this foretelling seems to have manifested in each new generation of his descendants. Simply observing the constant friction between Arab nations and Israel shows how this rivalry is more than a matter of territory or power. It's a drama that seems embedded in the very cultural DNA of the region, as if each new generation inherits not only the story but also the weight of this antagonism. Over time, this conflict pattern has been a burden each generation bears, a kind of dark legacy. Imagine growing up knowing that the other side is historically your enemy. How does that shape one's worldview? For many communities in the Middle East, this prophecy almost serves as a compass, guiding relations and fueling mistrusts. The younger generations inherit not only the territory but also the rivalries, as if each family passes down a piece of the biblical puzzle, keeping this dispute alive. However, is this conflict legacy a sentence or an opportunity to break the cycle? In many of these nations, the biblical narrative and the historical context intertwine so closely that they become almost inseparable. This blend between the sacred and the secular makes conflicts seen not merely as political disputes but as battles of faith and purpose. The weight of biblical rivalries, Old Testament stories, reflects in leaders' actions and people's perspectives. They interpret their battles not just as events of today, but as a continuation of the war that began among brothers. This elevates the conflict to an almost mythical level, transforming political issues into an almost prophetic mission. Still, some leaders and thinkers begin to question whether the cycle truly needs to continue. They ask themselves, is the prophecy an inevitable prediction or a warning of what could happen if the conflict persists? This idea resonates deeply in many communities, especially among those seeking to build bridges and overcome the past. Can this cycle of hostility be broken, finding a way for this generation and future ones to see the other differently? What else can this ancient prophecy teach us about the region's divisions and possible reconciliations? The conflicts among the descendants of Ishmael are not limited only to battles with other biblical nations. They also intensify within their own communities. The division between Sunni and Shia, for example, is one of the deepest and most painful separations in the history of the Middle East. This schism traces back to old disagreements over who should lead the faithful after Muhammad's death. It's a rivalry that doesn't end with words alone, echoing in every corner, every city, and still shaping the politics and daily lives of many countries. It's as if Ishmael's prophecy were a root that divided into complex branches, fueling both internal and external disputes. These divisions are not only political, they're also spiritual, rooted in the beliefs and practices that shape each group's identity. In countries like Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen, this rivalry reflects alliances and conflicts that go beyond power. They touch the people's very souls. Each group believes they have the right to follow their own version of faith, and this conviction becomes a cause worth fighting for. Imagine the pressure of living in a society where your own religious identity is seen as a threat to the other side. This separation, which began so long ago, continues to divide families, communities, and even entire nations. But it's not only religion that keeps this division alive. The fight for territory and power equally perpetuates this cycle. Disputes over sacred lands, where prophets are believed to have walked and where Old Testament stories took place, are still a source of tension. The cities and places that should be symbols of unity and faith become symbolic battlegrounds. Each piece of land carries special meaning, and the struggle for these locations becomes an assertion of power and faith. The ancient words of the Old Testament, the biblical stories of division and conflict, find new life in these modern disputes as if the past insists on shaping the present. For many, there is a feeling that these conflicts cannot be resolved only through treaties or agreements. What's at stake are deep beliefs and a sense of identity that transcends paper and pen. Some wise and religious leaders say that the path to peace requires a change of heart and a mutual understanding that, for many, seems nearly unreachable. But is it really impossible? How can these ancient divisions, prophesied and lived so many centuries ago, still influence today's choices? Perhaps the solution lies not just in diplomacy but in something that goes beyond politics, perhaps in the very essence of what it means to be human and seek peace. The prophecy about Ishmael and his descendants not only marks the history of a people but also challenges the understanding between spiritual and political interpretations in the quest for peace. In many traditions, this ancient prophecy is seen as an explanation of why peace seems so distant in the region. Both the descendants of Ishmael and Isaac receive divine blessings and promises, but the way each side views these gifts can become a point of conflict. For some, the prophecy is an inevitable destiny. For others, it's a reminder that perhaps peace needs to be sought by each generation, as a lesson of faith and perseverance. On the other hand, the political reading of this prophecy leads many to believe that there's a more practical lesson at play, one that speaks of power and territory. Today, when leaders and thinkers discuss the reasons for the lack of peace between Arabs and Israelis, Ishmael's prophecy often arises as a piece of the puzzle. Some see it as a guide to modern diplomacy, while others interpret it as a historical justification for war. Which brings us to an intriguing question. Does this ancient word truly decide the region's destiny, or does it merely offer a justification for those who desire conflict? It's fascinating how this prophecy becomes a symbol for both sides, a kind of mirror, where each sees their own mission and justification reflected. While some view the prophecy as a reason to maintain a posture of defense and vigilance, others interpret it as a call to seek reconciliation, something that goes beyond disputes over land. In a world where everyone seeks to validate their beliefs and actions, the prophecy becomes a powerful resource for narratives of war and peace. Who is right? Perhaps the answer lies in the search itself, in the constant effort to see the other, not as an enemy but as part of a shared story. For those who believe peace is still possible, despite so many divergent interpretations, the path is complex and requires a commitment that goes beyond words. Could it be that this very prophecy, which so often divided, can be seen in a new light? Perhaps, instead of viewing the words as a limit, they could be seen as an invitation to change. And so, the doubt remains. Is the prophecy a curse or a challenge to be overcome? This answer may only come when each side can see in the other the same quest for peace and purpose. So, after exploring these stories and prophecies, the question remains: can we apply these lessons in our own lives? The rivalries and conflicts we face, whether at work, in family relationships, or even within ourselves, can be seen differently in light of these biblical teachings. Are we capable of breaking cycles of hostility and finding lasting peace? Think about it. How many battles do you face that, deep down, reflect these ancient rivalries? If these stories speak to you, how about taking the first step to break away from negative patterns? If you want to continue on this journey of knowledge and discover more about what the Bible says about these and other conflicts, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. After all, we are only beginning to explore these mysteries, which may, who knows, transform the way you see the world.